Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Steel News podcast. I'm Brendan McGrevy here with the Steel News alongside Braeden with Bengals_NFL. Braeden, it's been a crazy offseason for the AFC North, the best division in football. What has been going on with Cincinnati this offseason?
Yeah, it's been a very busy and, dare I say, dramatic offseason for the Bengals. Obviously, the T. Higgins situation, I think everybody's aware. He has requested a trade on the final year of his contract. And obviously, he wants to get a long-term extension done. The Bengals seemingly do not want to trade him, and I do not think they will. If they do, I think it would be draft weekend. But I think the Bengals really value him. I think they rather say we get nothing for him, but we go all in and make that Super Bowl push this year.
Yeah, you mentioned T. Higgins. It's been a big conversation this offseason for Cincinnati. One of your best receivers alongside Jamar Chase really complements that Cincinnati offense. What do you wish to see the Bengals do? Do you wish to see them try to trade T. Higgins? I know they believe Cincinnati franchise tagged him this offseason, and that made him quite upset, and that's, I believe, why he requested a trade. What do you hope they do with T. Higgins this offseason?
I'm still not sure I'm decided because on one hand, the Bengals can get a lot of value. They could likely get an early second round pick. There's been speculation maybe the Panthers, maybe the Patriots with one of those picks. I I think T. Higgins gives the Bengals their best push at a Super Bowl currently. He plays such a big part in this offense. You come with a healthy Joe Burrow, healthy Jamar Chase, healthy T. Higgins, with a hopeful improvement on the offensive line with Trent Brown and that signing. That can give them their best chance at winning the Super Bowl because odds are they're not going to be able to retain him after this next season. And it's hard to find a replacement for a guy in T. Higgins, even if you do get a good receiver. Higgins is a top 15 receiver in the NFL, and having two top 15 receivers just does wonders for an offense, especially when you have an elite quarterback in Joe Burrow.
Yeah, and that Cincinnati offense is legit, man. I mean, Jamar Chase, one of the best receivers in the league, top three for sure. And having T. Higgins there, I mean, T. Higgins would be wide receiver one on like almost every other team in the league, except like three or four other teams. So I think if Cincinnati does want to trade him, they should get good value for him. But again, wide receiver is a deep position in the draft, and teams don't like to reach for receivers as much. But I do think T. Higgins is that guy that can make stuff happen, and I think Cincinnati should try their best to hopefully keep him, but if not, get good value for him. But let's talk more about Cincinnati this offseason. I mean, they signed, I believe, former Colts running back Zach Moss because they lost Joe Mixon to the Houston Texans. Tell me your thoughts on that signing for Cincinnati.
Yeah, it was certainly very heartbreaking to see Joe Mixon go. He was, until obviously he was traded, he was one of the longest tenured Bengals on the team. He may have been the longest. He was drafted in the Marvin Lewis era in 2017, was with the Bengals when they went 2-14, and obviously was with them in the Super Bowl, throwing a touchdown pass in that game. But even though Mixon is 27, the Bengals are starting to see a little wear and tear on him. He hasn't been as explosive, and the Bengals have also wanted to go back to more of a system running back, more of a rotation instead of having a true powerhouse back. So that's where Zach Moss comes in as a really well fit. They're not looking for him to be a power back, which he is. Not that he doesn't have power, but he's more of a elusive, dynamic, find open space and hit the sprints type player. So the Bengals wanted a guy like that more so than Joe Mixon, get a little more explosives, and the Bengals get that in Zach Moss for pretty, well, running back standards, maybe not cheap, but a good value deal, 2 years, $8 million for the running back who will probably have the primary of the touches.
Yeah, and I think like you were saying, he's an explosive back, and he had a really great year with the Colts. I mean, he's shown flashes of greatness, and Joe Mixon, I mean, he's getting older. He was a great guy. I mean, he was there through the thick and thin with Cincinnati, and like you said, Marvin Lewis era. But yeah, it was great to see. I mean, Cincinnati at least make a move in that aspect. But I gotta ask, what do you think of Cincinnati picking up? I believe it's Sheldon Rankins, is how you say his name, from he played for the Saints a little while ago, and I believe it was the Texans, if I'm not mistaken. What do you think about that signing for Cincinnati? Because I'm seeing from ESPN at least that's the best signing this offseason so far for them.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with ESPN. The Bengals, for so long, the offensive line's been consistent issues, which it still is, and I'm sure that's going to come up sooner rather than later. But defensive line was a pretty big glaring hole, especially with losing DJ Reader when he got hurt towards the end of last season. You could tell there was a significant dip. The Bengals allowed I don't have the exact stats, but they allowed a lot more yards per carry, yards per game. So they had a huge hole they needed to fill. And the Bengals get Sheldon Rankins, as you say, somebody who completely blew up the Bengals when he played them. He had 3 sacks against the team earlier this year, but they get the 3 tech that they're looking for. BJ Hill, he just wasn't exactly what the Bengals were looking for on the inside. He's not that number 1 on the interior. He's a good number 2. So for the Bengals to get somebody who's more explosive when it comes to pass rush passing, getting a big body replace DJ Reader to help improve that run game. I do think the Bengals need another defensive lineman still, but the Bengals don't need to rely on a rookie from losing DJ Reader. They get a very well established guy on a really good contract who can help the Bengals win this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you were saying before, I know what it's like to have a defense struggle against a running game. I mean, Pittsburgh especially had a tough time doing that when Cam Hayward was out for a couple weeks last season, I should say. But yeah, Cincinnati, I mean, they've had some splash moves made this offseason, but I guess what I should be asking you now, what do you hope to see them establish in the draft? Like, what positions do Cincinnati need to address the most in the first, second, third rounds, even in this upcoming draft?
Yeah, I think it's the big bodies in the first 2 rounds and maybe a receiver. I think those are the first 3 picks. I think offensive line will be round 1. This is such a good offensive tackle class. There's guys the Bengals can get at 18 that may some years, because of the importance of the position, you could go top 10 or at least top 15. So if as many offensive tackles there are in the Bengals, history of struggling on the offensive line, I think they'll be able to find their guy in the draft. I also, like I said, defensive line, Byron Murphy and Newton, they have been connected to the Bengals, I guess you could say. Reporters suggesting that it's certainly a possible avenue for the Bengals, and it makes a lot of sense because they also need somebody on the interior to defensive line. And with losing T. Higgins, they're aware that he's obviously not going to be there in 2 years even. So they're going to be looking for a replacement for a high-end guy. They have such a great history with drafting receivers. Obviously, they got T. Higgins at 33. While Jamar Chase was pick 5 and was already extremely talented, they got the right receiver in that draft. So I think those 3 positions will be the focus. And if I had to guess, it would be offensive tackle round 1, defensive tackle round 2, and wide receiver round 3. And maybe defensive back with their comp pick in the 3rd round, as they have 4 picks in the top 100. The Bengals have possibility to just take the best player available, whether they, for example, maybe they really love Byron Murphy and JC Latham. They have their pick of who they would rather have. So I think the Bengals are in a really good position with the current team needs they have. They should be able to draft players who can fill those needs and could maybe even start immediately.
Yeah, I think, I agree with that. I mean, looking at Cincinnati, it never hurts to have, a great offensive tackle, especially nowadays when those edge rushers are running 4.5 40-yard dashes and, insane speeds. Like, you have these guys that are quick, and offensive tackle is definitely one of the most important positions in football by far in the league, especially with these great pass rushers like TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, and Micah Parsons as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess taking a look more at other AFC North action, I want to go to my Pittsburgh Steelers. Braeden, the Steelers got rid of Kenny Pickett, or I guess I should say traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, and they got Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Wilson on a cheap $1.2 million contract. The Broncos are still paying him upwards of $30+ million per year, I think over the next 2 years. And the Steelers got Justin Fields from the Bears for dirt cheap as well, and they got Patrick Queen from a division rival in the Baltimore Ravens. What do you think about the Steelers offseason so far? Have they been doing stuff right? Are they reaching? What do you see?
But the Steelers made the playoffs last year with one of the poorer quarterback situations in the NFL. So just to get a upgrade with Russell Wilson as a playoff contender already does wonders for them. I think I really like bringing in Justin Fields, the backup Russell Wilson. After last season, I'm not sure what his future in the NFL looks like, but I think that's a good location for him. I hate that Patrick Queen stayed in the division, but I thought that was a great signing for you guys. Really fill a big hole in that defense, especially with the AFC. A lot of hard running, especially with the Browns, and we'll see where Nick Chubb is coming into this season. Hopefully he's healing up. But when you have running backs like that, Derrick Henry now even, that's very concerning as a Ravens hater. But
Oh yeah.
Patrick Queen, the Steelers need a linebacker who in coverage who's athletic and be able to bring down some of the better running backs in the NFL. So moves like that, I think they are keeping themselves in the playoff picture, giving themselves a chance to win the division. So I think, unfortunately for me, the Steelers have been making the right moves to make themselves a contender this year.
Yeah, and I think, it's the Steelers have been lucky with drafts and just how they play. I mean, under Mike Tomlin, they haven't been under 500. But taking a look at other AFC North teams, I mean, when you mentioned it before, the Baltimore Ravens getting Derrick Henry. Braeden, what do you think about the Ravens this offseason and what they've been doing?
Yeah, I think the Ravens are doing it exactly what they need to be doing. They haven't made a lot of big, sexy signings, but they don't need to. They're one of the best teams in the AFC currently. So I think they've been smart with their money. I think getting Derrick Henry in that offense just makes them a lot more dangerous, even if he's not quite what he was 2 years ago. He's certainly one of the top running backs in the NFL. So, and it's such an explosive offense. You get a guy like Derrick Henry who's just able to run it down your throat. That makes that offense even much more difficult to stop. So, while the Steelers haven't been making the biggest moves and haven't been getting the most attention, I think they're making the right moves and they're being smart and setting themselves up for success this coming season.
Yeah, and I think too, having Lamar Jackson, who's already one of the best rushing quarterbacks of all time, and two-time MVP if I'm not mistaken, phenomenal player. I mean, now they have Derrick Henry on that team. I think they just need to get a couple of receivers, and this team, is legit. I mean, the Ravens are a really good team, but I mean, we got one more team left to talk about. The Cleveland Browns. They got Jerry Jeudy from the Denver Broncos. That's like their biggest move, I believe, this offseason. Braeden, what do you think so far about the Browns offseason?
I think it's I think it's all right. I don't think they done a lot to really help them make that jump and improve. Obviously, like you said, they got Jerry Jeudy. He's someone who's been underperforming in the NFL. The Browns, they didn't give up a lot to get him, but they certainly paid him a lot on the new contract. So I think they're taking a pretty big risk there in an already very poor cap situation. Obviously, Deshaun Watson, it's such a unknown at this point in his career what he's going to look like next year, especially coming off an injury. But I still think the Browns are a good team, but I just don't think they moved the needle, at least at this point in the offseason.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the Browns, they haven't been making that many splash moves this offseason. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the draft. But I guess my next question for you, where would you rank the AFC North teams in terms of offseason moves made so far this season? Or offseason, I should say.
In terms of moves, I think the Steelers are probably number one. I think they're making this smartest moves, kind of like I said earlier. Nobody expected them to be a playoff team this past year. They were able to get one, and now they have an established quarterback, some fundamental key players on the defense as well. So hard to be too critical of the Steelers offseason. Then I debate between the Bengals and the Ravens. I say Bengals just because they're a little more diverse in the players they signed. Obviously, Sheldon Rankins was a pretty big signing, but they made a fair amount of signings that weren't sexy, but they got good starters. We talked about Zach Moss. They also signed Geno Stone, talking about stealing players from the Ravens in the division. They get a new safety after the Nick Scott experiences failed in the Dax Hill, who they drafted 31 overall. He hasn't quite lived up. I think the Bengals are ready to move him to more of a Swiss Army knife role, which was more of his role at Michigan anyway. So I think they're sign some starters that help move other players around and help the team, even if they're not the biggest players and the best players in the league. Then Ravens, that haven't done a lot, but they've done enough to keep themselves where they are and make that offense a lot better and scarier. And then the Browns at last. And like I said, I just don't think they've done anything to move the needle. And I think they made a poor financial move in the contract they gave Jerry Jeudy.
I agree absolutely with those rankings. I would have a hard time picking between the second and third, but I agree. I think Cincinnati has just made more big time moves. While Derrick Henry is a big time signing, Sheldon Rankins and Zach Moss and some other players Cincinnati has signed as well, I think add up over time more to the team rather than just Derrick Henry for the Baltimore Ravens. But well, to end this podcast today, Braeden, I would like to ask you very early AFC North prediction standings. You don't have to guess the records, but maybe where each team will fall this season based off of record.
Oof. All right, I think three of the four teams again are going to make the playoffs. I think I'm going to be biased. I'm going to say Bengals at one. I'm going in with the assumption Joe Burrow is entering the season fully healthy. He's already thrown again with his right hand with seemingly no issue. So if Joe Burrow is back with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and improved offensive line, I think this team can do wonders. Now, I'm having the debate between Ravens and Steelers at 2 and 3. I could almost see them having identical records and maybe even the Bengals as well. I think all three of these can maybe be interchangeable, but I'm going to stick with the Ravens at 2, the Steelers at 3. I think just Lamar Jackson, the season he had last year, if he does similar again this year, he's going to have a winning record. They're going to make the playoffs. And with the Steelers very close in that third ranking. They've improved so much, and so from 9-8 last year, or
10,
9-8, right?
10-7.
10-7. So from 10-7 last year to where they are now, I think they're going to get more than 10 wins. I think they're making the playoffs, and then I have the Browns at 4, which may be kind of an unpopular opinion, but I just don't think Deshaun Watson's good enough. I think while they have a good offense, they're going to really struggle this year. Kind of that spark of Joe Flacco's gone. And as we briefly talked about earlier, Nick Chubb is uncertainty. And when he does return, we don't know how the injury will affect him. History is unfortunately not on Chubb's side in terms of what his career may look like post injury. So those are my predictions with the Bengals, Ravens, and Steelers truly being interchangeable. If you told me you think the Steelers are going to win, then that's really believable, and that's hard to argue against. It's the best division in football. I don't think that's arguable after last year.
I think like you were saying, those first three teams, Steelers, Ravens, Bengals, are all interchangeable. I think for sure the Browns get fourth in the division. While they do have a good defense, I think that offense will struggle. Deshaun Watson's been very inconsistent and one of the most overpaid players in the entire league, maybe even league history, because he has not been producing. Joe Flacco did a way better job than he did on a cheaper contract. So I think the Browns definitely are fourth. Now, as for third, I know people are going to call me crazy, but I think the Ravens get third. I think because the Steelers just like they beat the Ravens. People were like, oh, like a lot of my friends will be like, oh, the Steelers are going to lose to the Ravens. Last 8 games, the Steelers are 7-1 against them. I think Joe Burrow being back and healthy, if the Bengals can maybe sign a receiver in this draft or draft one that's good, or re-sign T. Higgins to complement Jamar Chase, I think they'll be a lethal team. I think it's going to be very close. I think the Ravens are a double-digit winning team, but I think they get third. Now, as far as second, it's hard, man. I mean, like, I can see the Bengals getting first or the Steelers. I'm biased, so I'm going to say Bengals second. But again, like you're saying, those first three interchangeable. And I think the Steelers get first. And I think it's because they finally have a quarterback. Russell Wilson had similar stats to Patrick Mahomes before he got benched in Denver. So if they have him with George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth and Jalen Warren, who's a Swiss Army knife, and Najee Harris, they can just get that offensive line beefed up. They're going to be one of the best teams in the league. They already are looking dangerous. If they can go 10-7 with Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, imagine what they can do with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. And they don't even have to play like top 5 quarterbacks in the league. They just have to play like a top 15 quarterback. And this Steelers team can win like 12 games. So I think it'll go Steelers, Bengals, Ravens, Browns. But I think, again, those first 3 teams are interchangeable, and it's going to be very fun to watch. And we'll definitely have to do some episodes when the Bengals and Steelers play on game reaction results, game previews, and all that fun stuff. Friendly banter, if you will. But
Absolutely. I think now I am 99% sure this won't happen, but I see a scenario where Lamar Jackson could just completely fall off, or maybe that's an exaggerated term, but really take a step down. We've seen him be super inconsistent before, and that could establish into very poor, he's hard to predict. After last year, he showed more consistency, but again, I don't think it will happen, but I could see a world that the Ravens perhaps fall off, but I don't think that's happening.
yeah, and I think it's tough too. You have the best division in football. It's really hard to predict where every team will land in the AFC North. But Braeden, I appreciate you joining me on today's podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brennan with the Steel News here alongside Braeden with Bengals_NFL. Everyone be safe, be well, go Steelers, and AFC North goes crazy, man. Take care.